So we are ready.
You ready? Great.
Yes, we are very ready.
Okay, who am I speaking to?
Maheshwara.
Maheshwar. Who else is there? Is that Kamaleshwar?
Yes.
Namaskar.
Yeah,
And who else?
Thank you.
Is that Bhakti Devi? Yes? And? I don't know. I cannot tell. It's very tiny. Okay. Nice. I wish I was there live with you. Nice to see you. I can't tell everyone is there, but good. And welcome also to those who are here on Zoom, especially Chitra from Vietnam all the way, Vishwashanti, Kalyan, Tejaswini. I don't know, Auntie Kivali. I think you have another name, so I'm sorry if I don't recognize it from your from what's written in Zoom. Okay, welcome. So, Guru Mantra. Welcome. So today I want to share with you experiences about networking to maximize impact. And yeah, I mean, like you've probably heard that famous quote that never underestimate the power of a small group of people to change the world, because a small group of determined people to change the world, because indeed that's all that ever has. However, they don't change the world only by talking to themselves. It is of essential importance that we are able to get clear, coherent messages, in a determined way. Like that small group of clear, determined people is at the core, but we have to become effective at how to get messages out towards decision makers ultimately. People who are actually going to affect policy changes in the directions that we see would be useful and aligned with Prout or neo-humanism and leading towards a better world, because that's what the goal is. So with that in mind, I would like to invite you, we are using, whoops, how come I cannot see how to, one second, I'm just trying to see where the controls are to make it go forward. Here we go. Okay, so I'd like to invite you to share, because I'm sure those of you who are sitting in the room also have devices with you, perhaps telephones, etc. So because not everybody's having access to the chat, I'd like to invite you to use your phones and go to menti.com and put in the code 47262266. I'll repeat that again. So if you've got a phone, go to menti.com, and then it'll ask you for a code, and put in 47262266. Okay, and I'd like to hear, this is
Give us a second, Didi, because it's quite small, so I'll just instruct people how to do it.
Could you do that?
Yeah, the link is quite small, so I'll just instruct people. Give us a second.
Sure. And those of you who are also can see it better, who are on Zoom, you can already start. So the idea is, what do you think of when you hear the word networking? What does the word mean to you? How's it going there?
Yeah, they're just logging in.
Okay. It can sound like a kind of fancy word. I'm just curious where everybody's at with this word. What does it actually mean? In a couple words that come to mind when you think of networking.
So I think many people have logged in, so maybe we can proceed.
Well, as they log in and they start putting the answers, they will appear on the screen. So we'll know if it's working if the answers start appearing. There we go. Okay, outreach, communication. coordination, linking. Good. Good, good. Anything else? Politics. You can keep adding if you like. Action, friendship. I like that. Friendship. It's going to correspond a lot with what I say. Okay. Has everybody gotten a chance to add in? Okay, so communications come up a few times. That's why it's bigger. Yeah. Networking is basically communication. And I'm going to go forward now. Oh, wait, there was something interesting coming up. Interconnection, spider web. Yeah, a network is like a web. That's what we were seeing also in that first graphic. This kind of interconnecting web of relationships all around us. And you know, it's interesting, like if you've ever done that dynamic, group dynamic game where you have a piece of string and you thread it between the participants, and then when you press on one side of the, if anybody changes the tension, it changes the tension in the whole network. So yeah, communication, action, sharing, good. Okay, so don't forget this website because there will be maybe 2 or 3 other questions that are like this, so you might want to keep it open and they'll be coming up. Yeah, so networking means many things actually, but primarily my experience is that you have to kind of demystify it. It isn't this like super advanced thing. It's actually just common sense, building up of relationships through good communication. And networking can happen through online, through telephone, through talking, through videos, through, you know, email. There's so many ways, but basically what you're talking about is essentially building up good relationships. And so how do we do that? This is also very much in line with the instructions that Baba gave repeatedly about uniting the moralists. No, so let's just read this quote because it's always nice to read his words. So with the progress of science, the globe has become smaller to the human eye. No place on the earth is now inaccessible, and this is why it is the most opportune moment for building a universal human society. Set yourselves to task without any further delay. Remember, a human society based on ideology must be built with the help of all the moralists and progressive people of the universe. This is the only way for the survival of human civilization. Let's do that last part. I like it. I want to say it again. So with the help of all the moralists and progressive people of the universe. So notice he's not just saying with all the Margis. No, all the moralists and progressive people. So it's really essential to be able to work unitedly. And sometimes there's this feeling like united means united with the people who think like me, you know, and who are in my group already, or everybody has to come inside and then we're all united inside of that. But I think that unity, this type of unity, is about finding common purposes that bring people together. And even if they might not normally be friends, you know, they might not normally socialize together, but they have a common purpose that transcends those sentimental attachments and allows them to work as one towards the same objective. And similarly, he says, you know, we have only learned how to divide and subdivide humanity, and we never learned how to unite the people. So this is really like essential emerging skills needed for bringing about positive change, for evolving the consciousness on the planet, are to develop the skills to be able to work unitedly with people who are different, who might not share everything with us, but we do have a common purpose that we need to focus on. So networking, as several of you pointed out, now with the idea of friendships and good communication, etc., is about building good relationships. and trustworthy relationships. And how do we do that? I mean, when we want to have a good relationship with somebody, we have to be able to communicate well with them. And so what kind of communication works best in networking? Here, let me see if I had a Menti. Yeah, no, I didn't. Okay, so what kind of communication works best in networking? In my experience, like, in the first place, it's really important that the communication isn't just about, okay, I'm going to go network about Prout, so I'm going to go and like find people to tell about Prout, you know, and I'm just going to tell them about it. That's not, in my experience, like, that feels then to people like you have an agenda, that you're coming in to impose something, and it's usually not so attractive. It doesn't build good relationships. It's kind of like people coming to your door, maybe from Jehovah's Witnesses or something. They already got a clear agenda. They're not interested in listening. They just want to, like, you know, save your soul. And so that type of thing isn't networking. You know, that's more like propaganda. So networking isn't necessarily about going in with a set agenda. It is about finding allies, finding people who have some shared vision that you can appreciate. So, like, if you're interested in the environment or climate change, who else is active in that? Whose work do you appreciate? And so in my experience, or how I like to approach it, is to find people who are doing something that I can appreciate and sincerely start out the conversations with what I appreciate about them and about their work and about what they're doing. You know, for those of you who have gone through topic training or have had Acharya training or something, there is, you know, Baba gives some specific guidance on how to do prachar. And within that is, he's repeating like how it's so important to start out by, you know, kind of winning people's hearts by being very appreciative. And he gives different specific guidance about how to be appreciative with elderly or with young people or whatever, male, female, etc. But, you know, the key here is that appreciation, sincere appreciation, not just doing it as a trick, you know, like that you're doing it as some kind of like manipulative strategy. But sincere appreciation really builds good relationships. When you're able to offer some kind of, you know, what you're interested in, like if you're at a conference on climate change, again, let's use that, and there's a speaker who says something that is really kind of Proutistic or something kind of neo-humanist or something that you just simply really appreciated and it gave you a new insight, you know, wait till the speeches are over and go find that person, go up to them and appreciate them, you know, tell them what you liked about what they said, and just listen to them. You know, usually they're quite happy to hear some positive appreciation, and that opens up a door, you know, and you don't have to immediately, you know, come in with your views or whatever, but you can start building the relationship. So build a relationship with some appreciation. And then you can, maybe if they feel you're a really nice, appreciative person, they might be open to giving you their business card or be interested to get yours. No, and you might then just give a little short presentation who you are and what you represent, but very short. You know, oh, well, I'm Didi, I'm from Amartel, and we're working on this. Or whatever it is relevant to say about yourself in that particular situation. So, you know, being prepared with business cards, even though business cards are now a little bit on the way out, there's ways now that people have, I've seen it, I haven't figured it out myself. I still use business cards, but people sometimes are able to share with a QR code their ID stuff just directly from their phone. So, you know, starting out with appreciation, I think, is a good way to create a positive connection with somebody, and already they're more interested in you and what you have to say. If you've already shown them that you think that they're a brilliant person, that they're a smart person, that they're somebody that you admire and respect, then that's going to create reciprocity in the relationship. When you give attention, people are more interested to then reciprocate that. So human relationships tend to, you know, we have a tendency toward reciprocity, but it's like when you give it, when you offer it, you're setting the tone, and then it's going to, you know, there will be more likelihood that they will want to reciprocate the same type of energy to you. So being appreciative is, like, for me, the first most important lesson, I think, in good communication with new people in general, but specifically if you're doing something where you're trying to figure out how to be more connected with people doing similar type of work. Asking for contact info, so it's like that example of at a conference on a theme that you're motivated about, you find the speakers that you think are the most progressive, the most interesting, you go up to them, you appreciate them, but you also get their contact info. And once you got that contact info, I've seen this also happen to me, but the best networkers are the ones who follow it up right away, same day. They get home, they take all the business cards that they've gotten, all the new contacts that they've made, and you find some excuse to write a short message to them, whether it's a text message or a email. You try to immediately get the relationship going. So writing them. I mean, some of the best things might be a follow up on our conversation. Like, I was really interested in what you said about this, and it reminded me of this, and like offer them, a piece of useful information. Or I'd like to know more about that, what you said, where can I get a link to your article? Again, if the beginning of the relationship's not too centered on you trying to get something for you, I mean, in the sense of getting them to appreciate you or to like come on board with your ideas. If you start building the relationship first around their ideas, like, could I have a link to your research that you were presenting, or is there more information about that? I was really intrigued. You're off to a good relationship. You're starting to build a good, respectful relationship with that person. Also, offering some type of useful service. When you can be of service to people, it really builds credibility. I once was on an airplane next to a businessman who was very successful. And in the conversation, he was referring to business, but I felt that this is actually relevant for a lot of us. He's like, you have to really be focused on what people need and serve their need. And he's like, I try to always give people, I don't remember what field he was in, but he was always really well up to date with information that was useful to people in that field. Let's say he was in pharmaceuticals or something. It was like really knowing things that was useful to doctors, not just about his product or whatever, but being able to offer useful information to the people that he was serving, built up his credibility, his reputation as being somebody who really, cared about what they were doing and was willing to be useful to them. So, of course, salespeople, there is a lot more manipulation behind that in a way. But again, the more that you can stay away from, just actually doing things that are useful for people, this is building up good relationships. And I'm going to show you some examples of that from our work here, our recent work here soon. And professionalism. Now, there's bullet 6 there. Well, that's interesting. That was a mistake. Professionalism. When I say professionalism, of course, that means many things. It can mean being, we have to be careful that we don't come off as naive sometimes. If we're only, informed by looking at our own philosophy, and we haven't made relationships to how that relates to other movements, other things going on in the world, we might come off as a bit naive. So it's good to be well informed and to make sure that you really are trying to link the ideas that come from our own philosophy to things going on currently in the world, current thinking, progressive ideas, etc., and how do those things match up, to be well informed about that. But professionalism also means to me that you don't always have to be, you're not necessarily trying to become somebody's best friend. I mean, these people may or may not be people that you would necessarily want to socialize with or consider to be your best friend. But again, is there a common goal? Because for me, professionalism is the ability to work together unitedly with people by focusing on a goal, and it's versus, I would say, more sentimental strategies where I'm only going to work with the people who are like me and who think like me and who agree with me and like this. And, that's leads to more divisive tendencies in humanity. So being able to transcend, being able to work across borders, across interest groups, to be able to be open-minded and to be able to work well with people who are different is, I think, really important. especially with our messages of neo-humanism, we have to be able to walk the talk, not just to be able to tell people how they should do it, but like also sincerely to be able to walk the talk. So here's a small little personal story. I'm sure that many of you have probably had the same kind of experience, like getting stuck in an airport overnight. But in this case, I had the opportunity to be, I think it was in the Bergamo airport, and it was overnight with one sister. We were coming back from, oh no, actually it wasn't Bergamo, it was in Sweden. That doesn't matter. Anyway, we were coming back from a Gurukul conference. And this was a sister working in Croatia at the time. And she'd been part of Didi Ananda Rama's my first book project, which I thought was brilliant. I was so inspired by it. They had managed to create books with children's own illustrations and drawings on neo-humanist themes, and they did this in schools all over the country. And I thought it was really nice, and I was really, really interested in her. I really wanted to understand how she did it, what the experience was. And so we kind of talked through the night. We didn't even have to worry about sleeping. I think we pretty much talked through the night. But during that conversation, she challenged me in a way that really had an impact. She said to me, I'd recently been posted to Romania, and there were 2 kindergartens at the time there. And she was saying, are you really satisfied just running 2 kindergartens? And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, well, I think that acharyas shouldn't just be running 1 or 2 schools. They should be trying to influence and change the educational system of entire countries. And, if you're just there running a school, like, does that happen? Is the potential being utilized well? That really went in to my heart and mind, and I really thought about that a lot after she said that. And it started reorganizing and repositioning how I thought about what we were doing with neo-humanist education in Romania in particular. I realized that here we had a couple of schools that had been piloting, we're some of the first schools to actually do this, to include children with disabilities in a regular setting, not in a special school, not segregated, but within a regular school. And so this really was a challenge to me, is it possible? How could our school influence the education system of Romania? I started thinking in this direction. So I think that, part of what motivates us to start networking is to start to dream a bit bigger, and to not be satisfied, and to challenge ourselves to go beyond our comfort zone, because networking often requires going beyond our comfort zone. So in this case, it started me on a track of trying to understand what was going on in education in general in Romania. I started to join different networks. And that's also a key to networking, is to join organizations that are made of many different actors, in a particular field. So in the field of education, I joined the ISA network, which is the International Step-by-Step Association. I also joined the network of early childhood education, RENINCO. It is the network for those who are working in inclusive education in Romania. Because when you start to tune into networks, there's a sharing of information going on, and there is, sending links and things to you, information, news, you find out about grants, you find out about conferences. You start to be on the inside circle of the communication within that professional world. And I think it's really important to be tuned into those things and to start to identify, by watching them and by watching how things work, who are the decision makers? Who are the ones that influence policy? So, by observation, I started to understand who in Romania were the influencers in education. One woman in particular, Viorica Preda. She's in charge of early childhood education, very open-minded, very progressive, really radically changed the whole education system for early childhood education in Romania. So that also led me on a path where I eventually even worked together with my teachers for a couple of years, putting together all of our best practices into a curriculum document, which I submitted to the Ministry of Education to be recognized as an alternative, the way that Montessori and Steiner education is recognized. It hit a dead end bureaucratically because actually a characteristic of bureaucracies is that nobody wants to take responsibility for making decisions. And so the tendency is to ping pong you back and forth, like to avoid taking a decision by sending you to another bureaucrat and so on and so forth. So we got ping ponged. And at that point, I had too many projects I was juggling. So I didn't have the persistency to keep banging the door, which is what's necessary. Sometimes you just have to be very, very persistent. I haven't given up on it. I mean, I need to think maybe in the next year or two, I will revise that whole curriculum and continue, because I'll have some extra support here in Romania to do so. But in the meantime, yeah, this idea of like actually taking on the challenge to, and in the meantime, even though the curriculum didn't get approved, Viorica Preda read it very carefully. If she was the one who had the decision-making power, I think she would have approved it. But a couple things came from that relationship. One was that she said to me, okay, you've got a lot of really wonderful ideas here, but I don't get the clarity of like, what's the particular pedagogical vision of new humanist education that's different? Because it just seems like a lot of good progressive ideas altogether. That challenged me. I took that back to Gurukul. What's our framework? People started asking me, what's your framework? I'm like, what's the framework? So sometimes we hesitate to start doing this type of networking because we feel we're not ready. And Gurukul, this is often an issue, might be in Prout as well. We're not ready yet. We're not ready to be exposed to the wider world. We don't have our own act together. We have to figure out what we want. Well, sometimes just the fact of having to present yourself professionally and taking those steps starts to inform you what's missing and what you need in order to be able to present your ideas well and professionally within professional circles. So by her asking me what's our framework, I didn't know what a framework was, a curriculum framework, but then I start figuring it out and I start approaching like Kathleen and other experts, and we start putting together a curriculum framework. So these types of, by taking those steps, sometimes then you become more professional by working with professionals and having to present yourself as a professional and so forth. Fake it till you make it. Fake it till you make it, I think is the idea. And this leads me to the next idea, breaking out of the bubble. So it can be very comforting for us to just sit together with those other people, other Proutists, other neo-humanists, other educators, whatever, and to preach to the choir. It means where we are just telling our great ideas to people who already essentially agree with us and who are just going to keep it for themselves, So when this happens, like, we can easily create bubbles, bubbles of our ideal communities where we feel safe, where we feel together, where we are in our comfort zone, actually. And we can be very progressive and even very revolutionary in those contexts. But it's like I said at the very beginning of the presentation, if those ideas only stay within that small group of people, they do not manifest their full potential and power for change in the world. We need to challenge ourselves to break out of these bubbles and to find ways to, I think that the role of the ideas that our founder, Baba P.R. Sarkar, gave us are like catalyzers. They're like, we might not ever be a majority, but like a catalyst, it's like when you add the starter to the yogurt. Proportionally, it's a very small amount compared to the full proportion of like milk that's there. But that catalyst like starts chain reactions, that then transform the entire thing. The whole milk becomes yogurt. So I feel that we are the starter. We are the catalyzer. We are meant to catalyze, but catalyzing means, not catalyzing in a bubble. It's like infiltration, it's the ideas then spread and they go out. There has to be that core, like a think tank, that allows us to get clarity, etc. But that's not where it needs to end. The networking is so essential for being able, and especially, this means again, in the Baba's guidance for tapicas and stuff, he was very much emphasizing figure out who are the key people, the key policymakers, the key influencers in the community, and target them first. He even talks about find the people that have a superiority complex. Because if you can get the person who has a superiority complex on your side, he'll convince everybody else. So that's interesting. Baba's very pragmatic. So it's super important to be able to have other people who may not identify as Margis, might not ever identify with our spiritual, they might be Buddhists, they might be Catholics or whatever, but if they're able to have agreement on some core ideas around social justice, on future, whatever, and they are in positions of influence and power, then how can those ideas reach them in ways that are actually going to lead to broader change? So for example, neo-humanist education, again, I'm just making a parallel. This isn't a Gurukul conference, it's a Prout conference, but I think there's things that are parallel that you could learn here, which is that, in Gurukul, I think a lot of the focus has been traditionally on opening up schools and running schools and training the teachers of those schools. And I keep bringing up the point, I really don't think that neo-humanist education is meant to be another private school system, because that tends to only stay limited to elites. It doesn't transform public school education. And all Baba's writings about education actually are talking about free access and universal rights to education and so forth. I don't think that he was thinking Ananda Marga is necessarily going to replace, public institutions and governments who have the responsibility to educate their populations. And so that would seem to imply to me that then our role is to be able to bring value to public school education systems and to start, using pilots. I mean, our pilot schools are important, but again, not to see that as the end of where we're moving, but rather as a tool in order to promote and advocate that similar changes get integrated in the larger educational system serving everyone. You might have also heard of the concept of echo chambers. This is just an expansion on the idea of bubbles. So the echo chamber is, where you only talk to people who already agree with you. And the echo chambers are self-fulfilling. The way that algorithms work and so forth on social media, if you're only always getting all your information and you're always making searches for similar types of topics, you're only hearing information, ideas, and belief that fit the narratives that you already have. So it actually, we have to fight against this, because the whole way that Google and social media works is to keep us in echo chambers. And so we actually have to make conscious efforts to go outside of our comfort zones and to start speaking and working with people who are different, who have different points of view, in order to actually make sure that our ideas are relevant and that they are working for people who don't just, fit already within our very small echo chamber. Here is where I'm going to get ready to do something interactive. Again, get your phones out, get your Mentimeter ready. This isn't the slide yet, but the next one I think will be. So joining existing networks. Here, I'd like you to think about what are the topics within Prout in particular that you're particularly passionate about. Are you passionate about, I don't know, fair distribution of wealth? Are you passionate about climate change or something related to the environment? What is your passion within Prout? Specifically, what's a specific interest that you have? And then I also want you to think about who else is doing it. You've got devices there. If you don't know who else is doing it and who else is active in your country or in your community, you can quickly Google it. You can just put that interest and then put the city or the country where you are and see who's at the top of the Google list. And so here is your Menti.com with the code again, 47262266. And whoever's helping me with the Zoom, maybe you can put Menti.com as a link into the chat for the people who are participating by Zoom. So it's going to prompt you and you can write in your response here. What are your passionate interests? Because, Proud's very broad, so many things under there. I am sure that your interests are not necessarily the same, and that there's certain things that you actually are really, really devoted to, causes that really activate your passion, your enthusiasm, that you're really dedicated to. What is that for you? Is it women's rights? Is it minorities? Is it diversity? Is it environmental vision? And in the same box, add who else is active in that. At least one organization or key person that you admire, or at least recognize that they're important to that issue. Emergency. Okay. I'm not sure what you meant by emergency. Okay, women's rights. Don't forget the second part, though. You also have to add an organization. And it's easier if you put them in the same box. Development of children, ISA. Okay, good job. Yeah, ISA's Greenpeace. So the person who said Greenpeace is probably somebody who's interested also in the environment, I'm assuming. Try to link them as the person who did with development of children in ISA, so that we can see your interest and who else you think is an actor in that field. Women's rights, women refugees, animal rights, PETA. Okay. Equal distribution of wealth. Who else is active in that? Are we the only ones? Are there other people talking about that? Who's active in women's rights? Who's really visible? Who's at the top of Google? And then you can narrow it down a bit by animal care and protection, WWF, okay? Children's rights to safe growth, your adopt, okay? Education changing with Bill and Heather or Ricardo. Women's health, cycle awareness, Red School. Interesting. Art and cooperatives. Who's doing that? Art and cooperatives. Who's active in talking about cooperatives in Europe or in Denmark or in Italy? In Italy, there's a lot of organizations working for cooperatives. All right. So, yeah, I want to challenge you guys because some of you have only written down your interest. I want you to really look into it. Who else is doing stuff that you admire? Who else is active in the field? Because that's where your networking starts. It starts with Googling stuff. No, it starts with becoming aware. Who are the other organizations? You can even start mapping this out for your particular interest. You can make a mind map of it, for example, and start looking at who else is active, what are they doing, what do I like, and who else is doing it. And then from there, usually there's ways already on people's websites to start reaching out to them, to start contacting them. And again, your first contact isn't like, hey, I'm from Prout and I have this better idea than what you have. It's rather to start out with, what are you doing? What do you like? I'm interested. I mean, it depends if you're representing only yourself or if you're representing some type of organization and you already have a history of doing stuff, or if you have a specific project. Because part of what networking leads to is something called partnerships. I don't have a slide on this, so just take it out for a minute. Yeah, so partnerships are, a wonderful manifestation of basically networking, which is where when you find other organizations that like or want to work on the same issue and you propose a way of working together through a partnership. But that's like an advanced part of the relationship. You don't start out with like, it's like asking somebody for marriage. You know, I mean, like if you're going to go and find like a marriage partner, I don't think you're just going to walk up to the first attractive person and say, what do you think about setting up a marriage together? You look nice, you know. You've got to get to know people. You've got to build a relationship. You've got to be at the point where they feel through your actions and through the ways that you've been, you know, serving or offering information or, you know, appreciating them or talking together, getting to know them, that you're a trustworthy and interesting partner for them. So yeah, you don't start out with a marriage. You start out with building the relationship. That brings us back to networking's a lot to do with relationship. Ooh, I have to share the screen here. 1 second. That was probably a mistake to go out of it because now I have to, looks like I have to restart it or something. Let's try again. Full screen. And why aren't you finding it? Oh, here it is. I just wasn't seeing it. Okay. All right. Let's go on. So an example of networking also that led to a partnership and a project. I was really, and this is a question that I think a lot of us that are listening that are acharyas and have these orange uniforms struggle with sometimes, which is when, and I don't always have the same response to it. It really depends on the situation, intuition, etc. But should I wear my orange in a networking event or not? Sometimes I'm worried that the orange might become a barrier to people taking me seriously or listening to my message. They might get too distracted by the orange. But I made a decision. And so the first times I went to these education conferences, I was in civil dress. But at a certain point, I decided, I mean, I just have to be who I am. And it is part of our message. And I wore my orange. And it was interesting because when I didn't wear the veil, but I did wear the rest of my uniform. And when I did, it did, of course, make me stick out. It does make, you know, people come up and start conversations with you. But what was interesting is that out of that, this organization, Mutant, approached me and asked me if they could do a peer learning experience. It was a funded project through ESA on peace education. And they approached me, and it was partly because I was, you know, being orange, it became obvious I was a meditation teacher when I would talk to people. It wasn't something that I was hiding. So then, you know, there were two actually partners that came to me through those conferences, just came up to me and requested me to be a partner in. One of them was on yoga and executive functioning, and the other one was this one on peace education. So yeah, sometimes the straightforward approach, you know, can attract the right partners who have the similar interests. It's a tricky issue. It depends on the situation. I think ideally would be that we have people that are not necessarily acharyas, who are really well informed and charismatic and good networkers and so forth, that can be in the front lines of networking, at least in certain types of situations, for the same reasons, so that we don't just look like we're just, you know, another religious interest that's very limited, but it helps on some level. Okay, so the KIT project was another interesting networking experience. This was led by Rakesh, who was a permaculturist well known in Europe, and he's there in the corner on the left-hand side. And this was the whole team during one of our partnership meetings. So there was like 7 of us partners working on this project from 5 different countries. It was really interesting. One of the cool experiences at the beginning of that project was when we went for the first training, and everybody was introducing themselves and from our organization they were from. And this was just Baba's grace. Like, I was there, Rakesh was there, and there was what's her name? Tapeshwar, I think, from Switzerland. And there was also, the trainers were from Australia. And as we went around and presented ourselves, there were 3 of us out of the group that all said something about neo-humanist education. And when it got to the trainers, they said, oh yes, we've been aware of neo-humanist education. You know, there's a big school in Australia, etc. So it made neo-humanist, and then everybody was like, what's this neo-humanist education and why haven't I heard about it before? And all of these people that were there in that group were permaculturists that are interested in education. And so through that project and already with that first impression. Now, a lot of the permaculture world in Europe knows about neo-humanist education, which I think is really cool because there's such a synergy between permaculture and of course Prout and neo-humanism. And so it was really brilliant how just Baba kind of made that happen, and it made us look like we were bigger than we were, just that there were 3 of us in that event that all were mentioning neo-humanist education. So, you know, coming with a few friends is probably a good strategy. And especially that they, you know, they weren't, I think I wasn't wearing orange in the beginning of that project either. Okay. Now, my next slides are just going to be sharing a little bit of my most recent experience with networking at the Siret border and here in Romania with the Ukrainian refugee crisis. So at the beginning, you know, I had this sister, Melinda, who's in the center, who just contacted me. Like, we stayed, this is just amazing to me how Baba can work, because she'd come to one of my trainings for Amortel on rapid response training years ago, like more than 10 years ago when she was in Romania and working in Romania. She stayed in contact. She follows me on Facebook. Actually, Dado and Manchananda said, you know, I'm not so much into Facebook, but I have to admit that it was actually that you do that. That's why Melinda came to us. So Melinda saw a Facebook post that I made in which I was mentioning that Amortel was going to be involved in you know, doing work for children or something. And she said, can I come? Can I participate? And so I simply gave her the chance to do that. Like, to basically, she went with Dada. I had to go to Italy for another transnational meeting of a project. And so I couldn't be there right away. I sent her and Dada together, and immediately, through her service-minded attitude and through her way of going up to everybody and finding out their names and who they are and just being super empathic and caring. And she's an emergency psychologist, it's kind of her job, you know, so she was immediately like the firefighters just loved her, you know, and all of the other organizations. She created so many open doors for us, created so many good relationships just by her exceptional people skills. And she's our professional hugging. You know, I didn't realize it. It's not appropriate for Didi's to do, but like, hugging can be a great way of networking, apparently, if you're a psychologist. So, you know, she, through her warmth, through her care, she was talking to this woman who's heading a warehouse project where they're distributing, you know, these volunteer women, just super dynamic, that like set up this whole supply chain of supplying humanitarian relief goods to villages, and getting really burned out. And so just by listening to her and really being empathic and supportive, that woman just opened up, you know, and just wanted this big hug from Melinda at the end. And so these create really strong relationships. And it's also combining that idea of doing something useful for people, and then they become open to you. You know, I mean, like Melinda, by offering her emergency psychological care and, you know, supporting professionals to prevent burnout and being understanding about what they're going through, this has just created such good relationships for us. On the other hand, you know, so I invited Dada to be part of this, and he didn't accept my offer, so I'm going to expose him a little bit here, but I think he wouldn't mind. So we were at the very beginning of the crisis setting up our office. We'd been given a container by the firefighters, you know, that were in charge of the whole operation at the border, and we're going shopping for like office supplies to set up the office there and so forth, you know, like pragmatic things like pens and whatever, shelving and stuff. And at one point we're in the store and Dada's like, oh, we need a cookie jar. And he holds up a cookie jar. I'm like, we don't need a cookie jar. Are you serious? What do you mean we need a cookie jar? I mean, like, I don't even have a cookie jar, I'm thinking. You know, like, why on earth would we need a stupid cookie jar? But I was like, okay, Dada, you can get your cookie jar, you know? And he got the cookie jar. And it was, anyway, there were so many things that I've learned by watching Dada and Manchananda at work during a disaster, the early phase of a disaster intervention. And one of them is basic hospitality builds relationships. And so what he did is this cookie jar, and not only that, like some other organization came along and like donated a coffee machine, you know, and usually acharyas would probably be like, oh, I don't drink coffee, I don't need coffee, you know. But he's like, no, we want the coffee machine. And so whenever people came to the container, because we ended up being like the first point of contact. If a new organization was coming, or journalists or whatever, the firefighters would send them to us to deal with them rather than that they have to deal with them directly. So we were kind of this communication liaisons. Through this, we made amazing networking contacts because all the big funders came to us first. But what would Dada do? Have a cookie, sit down. Can I make you a coffee? This is your office. We have internet. Here's the password. We have extra desks. If you need a place to sit down and work, or you need something printed out, consider this your office. And he just kept saying this again and again, everybody that arrived. And you see, people visibly would relax, visibly would feel grateful. Then we would give them really useful information. What's happening at the border right now? What's the situation? What are the authorities deciding? Why is this and this happening? We had every day the authorities would come to us and talk about what was going on, partly also for their kind of like support, but also to give us information. And so when people would come, we could give them the latest up-to-date information. We knew all the actors there at the border, so when funders came, we could connect them to who was the most appropriate organization to work with. So we weren't only looking for our own opportunities, we were supporting all the other organizations there. So by this approach of offering real service to people, it's some of the most incredible networking I've ever seen happen very quickly. For example, here was IOM. So if you know who IOM is, it's the International Organization for Migration. It's part of the UN. Big guys, big actors, but they were at a complete loss how to hire people in Romania, how to make their team of enumerators, people who are going to go out and do the surveys to figure out where people are and what are the trends and the patterns. Dada just put me high on it, which is our coordinator. And within one day, he had already filled the positions for them. So we basically hired their team. They were incredibly grateful to us. If I need any information or stuff like that, they provide it immediately. So they remember Amortel. They were very grateful. We gave them, we really helped them out. So like this, really by sincerely being of service to people, by being of service to other organizations, not only for your own agenda. Of course, we also found the ideal partners and funders for ourselves. We could pick and choose. There were some organizations that wanted us, like UNICEF, and Dada didn't really want to work with the UN or UNICEF because he knows that they're super bureaucratic and complicated and don't give a lot of money to their donors because they keep a lot of it for themselves. So, they were coming and he'd be he also was protecting us because they'd be like, oh, tell us more about Melinda. And he'd be like, we'd be interested in, and then he'd be like, can we have her CV? And he's like, look, we can talk about partnerships, but it's not cool if you want to come in and hire our staff or steal our staff from us. But he would say it in a very funny, kind of joking way, but also very serious, so that people kind of knew that they shouldn't really mess with us in that way. And it was brilliant. In that way we were able to choose the appropriate partners and get partners that we really wanted to work with. Here's an example also of the coordination meetings that we set up. And so we, convinced our partners who were heading the operation that there really should be more meetings in which all the different actors at the border can coordinate with each other. At first, meetings were a little bit pompous, because then all the big guys came and gave long speeches, and we couldn't actually just network amongst ourselves. But then eventually they got bored of that, and then we proposed, we really only need a meeting that's just for the NGOs and just for us to talk between ourselves about the problems coming up. You don't have to send your bigwigs, to entertain us. So anyway, now that's what's happening. We have a once a week meeting. We publish the notes publicly on all the groups and on the website, etc. But this is the essence of networking and being a little bit in the background. In the way this type of work that we did at the border is not as exciting and fun to talk about for all of our sponsors as it is Melinda's work with serving the people more directly. But by serving the other organizations, we actually played a really important role in the organization flow and functioning of the whole operation at the border in Romania. But, our role was a little bit behind the scenes in a way. Well, not only behind the scenes, it actually almost got us into, so there's one woman who's a very, very influential power broker in Romania in the social system. I already knew her organization, and we worked with them very closely for a number of years. But, she at one point got so irate with us because she was because we were using the word coordination, which we hadn't selected that word. That was what the the ISU guys, the firefighters had said that they are doing civil society coordination, and it was written on the outside of our container. But she was like, when I met her at the border, she's like, so why are you here? You know, what are you doing on Martel? And I'm like, and I explained, and I'm like, well, when we came, you know, Dada did an assessment, and he saw that, Carl, you know, that he did an assessment, and he saw that there was a lack of coordination between the NGOs. And she went, what? There was no lack of coordination because I've been designated as the coordinator by ISU from even before this happened. We've done simulations for years before this event even happened. And I was like, the first time I even knew that she even had a role there. And so I backpedaled, and like used all of my diplomatic skills in active listening and good communication to de-stress and detension that, and reaffirm the relationship, and reaffirm our respect and understanding for her role, for the ISU's role, and like just reposition everything. But later in the relationship, there was again a point when one of our workers put a bad coordination on himself. Her funders came in to do an audit of their work, and when they found that everybody in Siret, when they talked about coordination, only was talking about Amortel, she almost lost her funding. And so she was like attacking us. Anyway, it was a big, huge diplomatic problem. But again, I think we managed to solve it. And but yes, we almost did our job a little too well for some people. It appears kind of has a dark side to it too. All right, I'm almost done. So yeah, we also kept providing like services to all the NGOs and frontline workers, like these psychological first aid, so that things wouldn't depend only on Melinda, but that we could build up the capacities of all the other organizations present to more appropriately deal with the psychological needs of the refugees, not just, you know, trying to give them all kinds of, you know, goods, but also and information, but to also really be sensitive to what their psychological needs were. And this has led to us having, you know, opportunities to like, you know, be on the inside circle with the government of the local county. So here we're meeting with the prefect, and, you know, getting invited to big conferences. Here I was invited to a conference at the Senate with, you know, that's Madalina Turza speaking, who is basically the person in charge of the whole effort of recovery phase for the Romanian government. And guess what? I was like, that name looks familiar. And so I started searching for it. And it turns out that she had been part of one of our projects on diversity education in 2017. And so I had a personal connection to this woman. So when she finished talking, I went up and I was like, you know, you might not remember me, but we did this project together. And I really loved how you are a mother of a person with, you know, with a child with disabilities, and you're such a fighter, and all of the work that you did for inclusion. Congratulations that now you're higher up in the government. Well, she just loved hearing that and seeing me. And so she gave me her personal phone number. And, you know, we talked about potential collaborations, and I explained what Amortel was aiming to do now in Bucharest with mobile teams, and that if we see needs on the ground that are gaps and stuff, we can communicate it to her. So, you know, even in these high level situations, you can, you know, like, it was just so cool, like to actually know somebody who is, yeah, at the top of the government now. And meanwhile, Melinda's now been doing her work directly in Ukraine, and she's been doing direct service in affected areas with a really innovative approach, which is like going in with people who are serving food and then offering emergency psychological care there on the ground, on the spot, where people have might be years before they would get to a clinic, if ever. So like being able to offer some immediate care, first aid type of care, but from a so this has then given her lots of experiences that she can share with other professionals. And so her role now is, again, she's our excellent networker. You know, she's there breaking the ground, sharing emergency psychological care. Crisis counseling is not a profession yet in Ukraine. So she's been heavily promoting this idea. Other organizations have come in with PFAs, psychological first aid, but that's for non-professionals. She's working with the professionals, and she's offering them two services. What is emergency psychological care? How is it different from psychological first aid and clinical therapy? And then she's also providing them with self-care sessions. So through art therapy, allowing them to express all of this tension that they're facing as first-line responders, and, you know, how to process it and find meaning in it and deal with the tendency towards burnout that all of them are faced with. So it's, these things have given her higher and higher and higher levels of invitations all over the place. She's on an MHPSS, which means mental health and psychosocial support group, which is basically a network of all the NGOs working on that. And she attended. I was so excited when I saw that she was attending. One of the sessions was going to be with Elena Zelensky, which is the wife of the president. And we'd heard from the Margis in Kiev that, and it might just be a rumor, I'm not sure, but it wouldn't surprise me that Zelensky was aware of her work, and that, that the term emergency psychology is now, really being talked about in Ukraine. They said, "Oh, you're so famous," they were saying to her. So, this type of like networking, I don't know, what can I say? It really works. So I also invite you now, last Mentimeter and closing of the session, will be 2 questions. One is if you have any tips to share, and the last question is going to be, what was your takeaway? But that's a separate slide. So first, do you also have any tips to share that have come to your mind when I've been sharing these things? Any other things? Because we've got some experienced networkers in the room. So, Kamaleshwar, Ramesh, like Vishwashanti, I don't know who else is here, like share. If you've got some other tips you want to share with people, please, or any of you that have done any form of networking, like what other types of tips might I have missed that you think are important to be said? So, it should be the same Mentimeter, 47262266. Just gonna give a minute there for anybody to add anything. I just saw my phone that we are 9 minutes over, so after this question and the next one, we will be ending. I just want to take a look at the chat. Does anybody want to add anything also to the chat? Oh, so sorry, Suman. I didn't see your message that I wasn't speaking slowly. I'm sorry. Okay. So you think I covered all the tips? No other tips to add?
Well, here are still going to the Menti.
Okay. Keep it open because the same Menti you'll be using for the next question too. Eating together. Thank you. Yeah, I didn't mention that. That is true. Here in Bucharest, I had organized a monthly vegetarian dinner. And that was a wonderful way for my sponsors to get to meet children, to see each other, to kind of create a community of sponsors. And so, yeah, I haven't been able to do it because of the pandemic, and now I've been too busy with the war stuff. But eating together is definitely a wonderful way to form good bonds. And that's classic. I mean, a lot of times it's like, they talk about like the real business deals get made at the, at the restaurant, or so, even when I go to conferences, it's not very comfortable for me to try and find vegetarian food sometimes at these situations. But I will go to if there's a networking dinner or a networking, cocktail hour or whatever, I will go. I might only have a lemonade, but I will go just to sit and talk with people. Because people are more relaxed when they're eating, and they're more interested in, kind of those non-formal conversations can be really, really valuable. So thank you for bringing that one up. Somebody here with the red one didn't show up what they were trying to say. Okay. Anything else? All right. Are still people trying to write something, or can I move on?
I think you can move on. Yeah, from Ananda Gauri at least.
Okay, so last question. What is the most useful takeaway that you got from this? Is there something new or something that affirmed something that you've been thinking? What practically do you think you can take away from this session and help you to be more effective in seeing that the ideas that you deeply believe in have more impact in the world? Okay, inspiration. Inspiration is good. I hope it leads to action. I see people busily writing this time, so we're going to wait a little bit. How to present a good networking presentation. Okay. Yeah, of course, if you're giving a similar presentation, then use your own experiences with networking that you've had and your own successes. I used a lot of anecdotes. Okay. Oops. Finding your passion in Prout and seeing who else is in that field. Very good. In the first meeting to talk immediately about your interest in them. Okay, good. The importance of networking. I really think it's through networking. That's the key. That's really going to get our ideas to realize their full potential as catalyzers of changes in this world. And especially finding ways to get them all the way up to decision makers. Hope and improvement in our organizations. Good. Hospitality. Yeah, I cannot tell you what a big lesson hospitality has been for me watching data, and that was really such an important secret. Serve other organizations, not only your own agenda. Good. Yeah. You know, Seva works. What can I say? There was a time when Baba, I heard a story recently about, Baba had, asked workers to, Samaj workers to run for an election, and they did not win anything. They had no wins. And so everybody was like doing the kind of like RDS on this, like the what happened, why, what was the defect. So, he was asking, but how many schools did you open? And, they had reported having opened up different schools, but when they dug into it, it was all fictitious reports. They had not really opened any schools. And so the idea was that in order to win elections, in order to actually have impact, to be somebody that people listen to, that doing service is really, really important. That's what gives you the love of the people, and then when they become open to you. And Dada Mantrananda was actually telling me, you might have heard of like Hamas in Lebanon and stuff. And it's sort of an extremist group for Westerners outside. They can't understand why they have so much support of the population, because they're so extremist and violent and terroristic and like this, and why does the population support them? Well, their political and militant branch is only a tiny percentage of their organization as a whole. He told me that a lot of what they do is opening schools and clinics. And because they really serve the people, the people then, feel really that they are good people and that they're on their side and that they're working for their local interest and taking care of their actual needs. And so service is so important for creating openness to, Prout and so forth. These two things have to go hand in hand. So I thought it was really interesting, though, that Baba had also asked that question about schools and about service, and that he linked that as the reason why that the Samaj movement had failed to get any elections. Yep. All right, so thank you very much for this invitation. It's been a pleasure to be with you all, if only virtually like this, and I really hope that it enhances your work and that we will see Prout ideas, even indirectly, like coming out through society. I forgot to tell you one last little story, was that even though the government has not accepted my curriculum as a national alternative, what did happen is by talking with Viorica Preda, she asked me to kind of like laser in on what I thought were the things that were missing from the Romanian educational system. And I said something like, well, too much emphasis on academics from too early of an age, and there needs to be more emphasis on building up character and the use of stories and da, da, da. And then when the new curriculum came out 2 years ago, and she was interviewed in the paper, she said almost verbatim what I'd said in terms of what was new in the new curriculum. She's like, more emphasis on values and on storytelling. And I couldn't believe it. So I was like, okay, probably that was not due. I mean, it would be probably a lot of ego to think it was just due to my one interaction with her. But it was one voice for sure in that direction that she listened to, probably other voices as well. And, you know, in the end, something happened which we didn't get any credit for, but does it matter? If the right action is taken, do we need to have our branding on it and our copyright? Or is it more important that the ideas just get out there and reach and serve as many people as possible? So I tend to think the latter. I tend to think that, I mean, it's great when we get credit for it, and I think we should get credit whenever credit's due. But also that humbleness of being able to simply just, you know, in a unconditional, selfless service, you know, to offer things for the benefit and welfare of society that are, you know, taken up, even if we're an indirect subterranean influence, like Baba talked about Tantra as a subterranean influence beneath the society. So, yeah. I wish you all success in your networking endeavors and to change the world through it. Namaskar.
Thank you so much, Namaskar, for sharing.
You're
Really
welcome.
lots of practical advice. I'd like to see what people, anyone here would like to say about their takeaways. You know, for me, it was really about thinking big, aiming high and thinking big. And I think that's really super relevant for Prout work, of course. So anybody else want to take the microphone and share anything?
It's nice to hear your voices and not just the Mentimeter. Well, I'm going to stop sharing.
Silence is consent.
Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they want to move on to the next program.
So,
Yeah. Oh, Suman has his hand up.
Yes, can I come in?
someone online. Yeah, okay.
This is Shuman Das from Bangladesh. Let me start by saying a big thanks to you for your nice presentation. It's
You're
really,
welcome.
really nice. And namaskar to everybody from Bangladesh. I could further understand the power of networking. Which is great from your presentation. I could learn the power of networking. And for me, networking is also to create a greater voice. And also, I mean, if I cite example from the humanitarian action, in humanitarian action, you need a greater voice. You need to achieve big. If you want to achieve big in a quickest time, then you need many people, many agencies help and their cooperation, and networking can help you to build that cooperation. So this is something, one of my greatest takeaway. I can further take I can further concrete my understanding on that. Thank you, Didi, for your nice presentation.
Yes, you're welcome. Yeah, it's uniting the moralists. There are so many very, very moral and strong people working in different fields, you know, including humanitarian, including environmental, and very ideal, you know, with strong idealism, but also with practical experience. And so there's a lot of good out there. And it is really connecting the dots just makes the messages stronger and to be able to reach more people. So
Didi, one more point, that is, you talked about the Dada Umatmanandoda. Fortunately, I had a chance to not work with him, but we worked in the same crisis. We worked in the Rohingya crisis. That time I used to work for IRC, International Relief, International Rescue Committee, and he was working next to my building. So we, very often we met each other and we discuss about, because this is a very complex crisis, very complex crisis. He was based in a local NGO, and I was leading the operation, emergency operation from the IRC. I was the head of operation there. So we had a lot of problem. We discussed together, and we that time we could understand we need a really cooperation from the local organization, inter-organization, so that we can put pressure on the government, because access was very challenging, very difficult because government was very resistant for accessing the the Rohingya crisis. So we worked together. So I could understand, and we could feel the importance of networking. And when Dada left, I started my full operation. And I also, I have been the part of many networking, and we developed some, cooperation and coordinating agency. that all needed very quality networking skill and capacity. So from today's presentation, I could further strengthen my skill how to do a good networking.
Good.
Thank you, Didi.
Good.
Thank you.
Thank you. Namaskar. Okay. Namaskar, everyone.
Thank you, Didi. Namaskar.